Maybe if you spent less time acting like a martyr, you wouldn't still be living like a burden. The whole dinner table burst out laughing. Stay with me because what happened after that night completely destroyed this family, piece by piece. This is the story of Selena Marsh, a 29-year-old woman from a quiet suburb outside Denver. What she went through with her own family is something a lot of you are going to recognize, so let's get into it. Selena sat frozen at the end of the table while her mother, Adrienne, calmly sipped her wine like she hadn't just humiliated her own daughter in front of everyone. Selena's younger brothers, Julian and Corey, laughed right along with her. Nobody defended her, nobody even hesitated. Selena looked around the room. The food on that table, she paid for it. The birthday decorations on the walls, her money, even the expensive cake sitting proudly in front of Adrienne had come out of Selena's bank account that very morning. And still, somehow, she was the burden. Then Adrienne smiled and kept going. She never finished school, never built a life of her own. She's always depended on this family. That sentence broke something in Selena because the truth was the exact opposite. At 19, Selena had walked away from nursing school when Adrienne started vanishing for weeks at a time, chasing men and parties in other cities. Selena became the one waking up before sunrise to pack lunches, help with homework, work double shifts, and sit beside Corey's hospital bed when he nearly died of pneumonia at 6 years old. She raised those boys practically alone, while Adrienne played the exhausted single mother for anyone who'd listen. Over the years, Adrienne rewrote the story bit by bit, and slowly, the boys started believing her version instead of living the real one. Selena looked at Julian, sitting beside his girlfriend. Just 3 months earlier, she'd quietly paid his rent so he wouldn't lose his apartment. Then she looked at Corey, the same little boy who used to hide in her hoodie during thunderstorms. Now he couldn't even meet her eyes. Something inside her finally gave out, but nobody noticed because Selena smiled. Not a sad smile, a calm one, the kind that made the whole room go quiet without anyone knowing why. She stood up slowly, grabbed her purse, and looked her mother dead in the eye. "You're right, Mom," she said softly. "I should stop carrying things that were never mine." Nobody understood what that meant. Not until 3 weeks later, when the electricity shut off, the landlord wouldn't stop calling, and Julian found a locked file hidden in Selena's old closet labeled "Things I Never Told Them." At first, nobody cared that Selena was gone. Adrienne rolled her eyes every time her name came up, calling it another dramatic tantrum. Certain Selena would come crawling back begging for attention. But 4 days later, the apartment started falling apart. Warning texts about the unpaid electric bill lit up everyone's phones. The Wi-Fi cut out mid-video for Julian. Then he discovered his car insurance had lapsed 2 weeks earlier. Selena used to quietly renew it every year without a word. One problem stacked on another, and slowly, something terrifying became obvious. Nobody in that apartment actually knew how their own lives worked. For almost 10 years, Selena had handled everything silently: bills, groceries, appointments, repairs, carrying the entire family without ever asking for credit. Nobody noticed until she was gone. Adrienne got angry instead of worried. "She's doing this for attention," she snapped, throwing unpaid notices across the counter. "She wants everyone to feel sorry for her." But her words weren't landing anymore, especially not with Corey. That evening, Corey opened the fridge and just stood there. Almost nothing inside: old juice, expired milk, half a loaf of bread. For the first time in years, nobody reminded him to eat. Trying to avoid another fight, he decided to make pasta himself. He filled a pot with water the way he remembered Selena doing it, but got distracted on his phone and forgot the stove was on. Minutes later, smoke filled the kitchen, and the fire alarm screamed through the apartment. Adrienne came running and yelling while Julian threw open windows. Corey just stood frozen, staring at the burned pot, and suddenly a memory hit him so hard it nearly knocked the wind out of him. He was 8 again, standing on a chair next to Selena while rain hammered the windows, her teaching him how to stir soup and joking softly. "Mom probably won't be home tonight." Back then he'd laughed. Now the memory felt unbearable because he finally understood something. Selena had never just been his older sister. She had been the only real parent he'd ever had. For the first time since she disappeared, Corey felt something settle deep in his chest: guilt. But what happened next would break the family wide open for good. A week after Selena vanished, the apartment didn't even feel like home anymore. The sink stayed full of dishes. The fridge stayed empty. Unpaid bills piled up on the counter like a wall nobody wanted to touch. Then one afternoon, Julian pulled another eviction warning out of the mailbox, and something in him snapped. He stormed into the living room, waving the paper while Adrian sat on the couch scrolling her phone like nothing was happening. "What is going on?" he shouted. "Why is everything falling apart this fast?" Adrian looked annoyed, not worried. "I already told you, your sister's being dramatic." But Julian wasn't buying it anymore. Rent was overdue. The lights were about to be cut. The landlord had his personal number now. None of it made sense until Adrian, mid-argument, let something slip. "Selena paid a lot of the bills," she muttered. "She covered over half the expenses here." Julian froze. "What?" Adrian crossed her arms defensively. "She owed us for living here," she snapped. But the math in Julian's head had already stopped working. How does someone lazy and dependent end up paying half the household bills? That night, Julian started tearing through old drawers and paperwork, and the deeper he dug, the worse it got. Selena's name was on the utility accounts, the medical bills, the late rent notices, even Corey's old school fees. He sat there with a growing weight in his chest as memories started resurfacing. Selena coming home late, exhausted from double shifts, falling asleep at the table still in her work clothes. Skipping dinner with a soft, "I already ate." He'd never questioned it, because Adrian always acted like she was the one holding things together. Now he understood. Selena had been quietly carrying the whole family while their mother took the bow. Unable to sit still, Julian walked into Selena's old room. It still smelled faintly like her laundry soap. He dug through the closet hoping for answers and found heartbreak instead. Stacks of unopened nursing school acceptance letters, scholarship offers, entire futures she never got to live. At the bottom of the box was an old photograph, 19-year-old Selena holding a toddler Corey on her hip while helping a young Julian with homework. No mother in the frame, no father, just her. Julian stared at that photo for a long time, and for the first time in his life, he felt ashamed of how he'd treated his own sister. Corey couldn't stop thinking about that locked file. "Things I never told them," the words wouldn't leave his head. Late that night, once Adrian was asleep, he and Julian sat at the kitchen table and finally opened it. Inside were years of hidden pain, receipts, hospital records, old journals, handwritten notes folded carefully, like she'd always hoped someone would eventually read them. At first, the brothers told themselves she must have written it all out of anger. Then Julian picked up a hospital report and the color drained from his face. Age 19, patient Selena Marsh. Diagnosis: severe exhaustion and malnutrition. He read it twice because his brain refused to process it. She had physically collapsed after months of overworking herself caring for multiple dependents. Them. Corey sat down hard, staring at nothing, while Julian kept reading in silence. Doctors' notes about sleep deprivation, chronic stress, physical burnout at 19, while other people were starting college. Selena was working herself into the ground trying to keep two kids safe, and nobody had noticed. Then Corey found a handwritten note dated years back. "Mom hasn't been home in 6 days. Julian keeps pretending he isn't scared. I told them everything's okay, even though I don't know if it is." Corey stopped breathing for a second. He remembered that week, the thunderstorm, the power outage, Selena sleeping by the front door every night waiting for their mother to come home. He'd thought it was normal back then. Now it felt like a horror story. More memories surfaced. Selena cutting her own food smaller so they'd have more. Selena pretending blackout games were fun so they wouldn't be scared. Selena smiling with exhausted eyes. For years, they'd remembered those as happy childhood moments. Now they understood those weren't happy memories. Those were survival memories, and the worst part was realizing how blind they'd been. The more the brothers learned, the more their mothers started unraveling. Every conversation in that apartment turned into shouting. "She turned you against me," Adrian screamed one night after Julian questioned another unpaid bill. But deep down, both brothers already knew this wasn't about anyone's words anymore. It was about proof. Julian spent hours going through bank statements and old records spread across the table. Every page revealed another secret Selena had carried alone. Transfers showing she'd secretly covered rent multiple times after Adrian blew through the account on shopping trips and weekend getaways. His hands actually shook reading it. Meanwhile, Corey dug through old family emails and found dozens of messages from Corey's school thanking Selena, not Adrian, for attending parent meetings, signing permission slips. answering emergency calls. Every message felt like another piece of his childhood collapsing. He remembered school events where Selena sat clapping proudly in the audience while their mother was always busy. He'd never questioned it then. Now every memory looked completely different. The lies were cracking apart one by one, but the final crack came out of nowhere. One afternoon, checking the mailbox, Julian accidentally dropped an old photo of Selena. An elderly neighbor walking by stopped and looked down at it. "Oh," she said softly, "your sister." Julian looked up, surprised. "You knew her?" The woman nodded sadly. "That girl loved you boys more than anything." Then her face changed. "Some nights your mother disappeared for days. Your sister used to sit outside crying by herself after you two fell asleep." She paused. "But every morning she still smiled for you both like nothing was wrong." Corey's chest tightened instantly. Another memory surfaced, a thunderstorm, him waking up scared, Selena sitting wide awake beside his bed. Not their mother, never their mother. That almost broke him right there. Back upstairs, Adrian kept spiraling as the calls from creditors piled up. For years, she'd controlled the family narrative by painting Selena as weak and ungrateful. Now that story was falling apart in real time. And for the first time, Julian and Corey saw their mother clearly, not as the victim, but as the reason Selena lost her entire youth trying to save everyone else. If you think that's rock bottom for this family, just wait, it gets so much worse. A month after Selena vanished, the apartment barely resembled a home anymore. Dirty dishes filled the sink. The lights flickered from unpaid bills. Nobody laughed. Even Adrian looked worn down from the constant calls and mounting debt, but the silence was worse than the chaos ever was. One rainy night, Corey went digging through an old laptop, hoping for any clue about where Selena had gone. Mostly he found old work files and invoices, until he noticed a saved draft email that was never sent. The subject line made his stomach drop. "I'm tired." He clicked it open with Julian reading over his shoulder, and the message wrecked them both. Selena had written about feeling invisible in her own family, about giving up nursing school, relationships, sleep, her entire future, so Julian and Corey could grow up safe. Line after line exposed pain nobody had ever noticed, working double shifts while pretending to be fine. Hearing herself called lazy and useless after years of quietly protecting everyone in that apartment. Then one sentence completely shattered them. "I think they only noticed me when I stopped saving them." The room went dead silent. Julian lowered his head, tears filling his eyes because she'd been right. Everything falling apart now proved it. Nobody had truly seen her while she was holding them all together. They only noticed her once she was gone. Corey kept reading with shaking hands. Selena wrote about feeling lonely, even surrounded by family. About crying quietly in the bathroom after everyone fell asleep because her whole life felt like it belonged to other people, and somehow still blaming herself for wanting more. Julian sat down hard, covering his mouth as silent tears rolled down his face. For years, he'd believed his mother's version of events. Now he understood Selena had spent nearly a decade quietly falling apart just to keep them alive. Then came the last line, "I don't hate them, that's the worst part. I still love them enough to stay if they asked." Corey broke down completely because that sentence hurt worse than anything else in the email. She'd stayed because she loved them, and not once had anyone asked what she needed in return. Not once had anyone told her she could rest. Not once had anyone told her she mattered. They just expected her to keep sacrificing herself forever. For the first time, both brothers understood the full truth. Selena hadn't left because she stopped loving them. She left because nobody had ever loved her enough to stop her from drowning. For weeks, Julian and Corey searched everywhere, old workplaces, old friends, places she used to go to think. Nothing. She had disappeared completely. Meanwhile, the apartment kept crumbling, bills stacked higher. The landlord threatened eviction almost daily, creditors called nonstop. The home Selena had spent years quietly holding together was finally caving in without her. One evening, Julian found something in old banking records, a small payment trail, tiny deposits, utility payments from another state. It led to a quiet town 3 states away. For the first time in weeks, they knew where she was. But what hurt most was realizing she hadn't just left, she'd rebuilt an entire life. New apartment, new job at a medical clinic, new number. No contact with anyone from home, like she'd finally escaped the life that was slowly killing her. "She really left everything behind," Corey whispered, staring at the screen. Julian nodded slowly because deep down they both understood exactly why. Back home, the apartment grew colder by the day. Adrian spent her nights panicking over bills or blaming Selena for abandoning the family, but neither brother was listening anymore. They were too busy remembering everything they'd ignored for years: the empty fridge, the nights Selena claimed she wasn't hungry so they could eat, the exhausted smile hiding tears she never let them see. For the first time, the brothers started talking honestly about those memories, and every conversation brought fresh guilt. Not just because of what their mother did, but because they'd believed her so easily. Corey remembered rolling his eyes at Selena's worry over bills. Julian remembered laughing at jokes about her being dramatic. Now those memories haunted them because the truth was painfully clear while they blamed her for being stuck in life. She was sacrificing everything to give them a shot at one. And the worst part, she never once asked for recognition, only love, a love they failed to give her until she was already gone. The confrontation finally happened on a cold Friday night. The apartment sat quiet except for unpaid notices scattered across the table. Adrian stood near the sink, pretending things were normal, while Julian stared her down, done with the excuses. "No more lies," he said firmly. Adrian bristled. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means stop pretending Selena ruined this family. We know the truth now." For a second, she looked rattled. Then she exploded. "She manipulated both of you. She wanted you to feel sorry for her. She always played the victim." But her words had no power anymore, not with the bills, the hospital reports, the journals, years of proof sitting right there on the table. Corey, quiet until now, finally looked up. His voice was calm, but it carried years of pain. "If you loved us so much," he asked softly, "why was Selena the one raising us?" Dead silence. Adrian opened her mouth and nothing came out because there was no answer, only truth. Blaming Selena had always protected Adrian from guilt. Calling her lazy was easier than admitting her daughter gave up her whole future fixing problems she herself had caused. Tears filled Adrian's eyes as the weight of it finally landed. She sank into a chair, covering her face, and broke down crying. "I did my best," she whispered, but neither brother felt any comfort hearing it. The apology came far too late. No amount of tears could hand back the years Selena lost, the school she never finished, the friendships she never had time for, the peace she never got to feel. Julian looked around the apartment that had survived for a decade on his sister's back and felt hollow. Corey wiped his eyes, not out of hatred for his mother, but because he finally understood how deeply Selena had suffered while still loving them anyway, and she'd carried all of it completely alone. Months later, Julian and Corey stood outside Selena's new apartment building. Neither spoke in the elevator. The silence wasn't from not knowing what to say, it was from knowing no apology would ever feel big enough. Julian knocked softly. A few seconds later, the door opened and there she was. Selena looked different, healthier. The exhaustion was gone from her face, the dark circles gone from under her eyes. Simple clothes, hair tied back loosely, for the first time in years she looked peaceful, like someone who'd finally stopped drowning. Nobody moved, then Corey broke down. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry." Selena looked stunned at how fast the tears came. Julian swallowed hard. "I believed horrible things about you," he admitted. "I treated you like you were the problem when you were the only person holding us together." Selena said nothing. She let them in, though the air felt heavy and awkward. The apartment was small but warm, plants by the window, nursing textbooks stacked on the table. For the first time, Julian saw a glimpse of the life Selena could have had all along, a peaceful one. A normal one. She listened quietly as they apologized again and again. She didn't yell, she didn't insult them. Somehow that hurt even more. Then, after a long pause, she asked one question. "Why did it take me disappearing for you to see me?" The room went completely still. Julian lowered his head. Corey wiped his face because there was no good answer, only shame. They'd spent years accepting the easy lie instead of asking questions, instead of noticing the person holding them up was quietly falling apart the whole time. Corey finally looked up, desperate. "Please come home," he begged. "We can fix things now." Selena looked at him for a long moment, then she shook her head gently. "That place was never home for me." Those words hit harder than any anger could have because both brothers finally understood while they'd believed Selena abandoned the family. She'd actually spent her whole life trapped somewhere she never belonged. This small apartment with its plants and its textbooks was the first real home she'd ever had, and for once it was entirely hers. A year later, the Marsh family looked nothing like it used to. Julian and Corey no longer lived under Adrian's shadow. There were no more excuses made for her, no more pretending things were fine. It wasn't easy. At first, they struggled just to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. Every small task, a reminder of everything Selena used to handle silently. With that came constant guilt, because now they understood exactly what she'd been carrying all those years. Selena, meanwhile, was finally living a life that belonged to her. She went back to nursing school, not to save anyone, not to hold a family together, but for herself. It felt strange at first, peaceful but unfamiliar. Some nights she still woke up out of habit, bracing for a crisis that wasn't there. Slowly, those nights became fewer. She was learning how to breathe without guilt. One rainy evening, coming home from class, she found an envelope waiting at her door. No name, just her address written carefully by hand. Inside was a letter from Corey. The first line stopped her cold. "You were never the burden. You were the reason we survived." Selena sat on the edge of her bed, holding the letter, rain tapping softly against the window. Tears filled her eyes, quiet ones, not dramatic, just years of exhaustion and silence finally being let out. The truth didn't erase what she'd been through. It didn't give her back the years she'd lost, but for the first time, someone had finally said the words she'd never been allowed to hear, that she wasn't the problem. She was the reason they made it through it all, and in that quiet moment, something in her finally softened, not fully healed, but understood. For the first time in her life, Selena let herself believe she was more than just what she gave to everyone else. So that's Selena's story. What would you have done if you were in her shoes? Would you have stayed and kept fighting, or walked away the way she did? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what you would have done in her situation. If this story hit you the way it hit me, please hit like, subscribe for more stories like this one, and share your thoughts below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.